Hello, this is a presentation by Nick, Tyler, Kayla, and Ben on a piece of software developed by Sovos Compliance called Taxport ACA. Taxport ACA was developed to make Affordable Care Act tax reporting and compliance more efficient for businesses. The application itself is a software as a service, which is over the web and was developed entirely in-house by Sovos. The typical customer of Taxport ACA would be a business who employs 50 or more employees. The Affordable Care Act has made it mandatory for businesses who employ 50 or more employees to file tax forms with the IRS every year regarding their healthcare offerings to their employees. Also, businesses with less than 50 employees who are not mandated by the Affordable Care Act to report the health insurance offerings to its employees can also purchase Taxport ACA. The main purpose of Taxport ACA is to make Affordable Care Act tax reporting as easy as possible for businesses. It does this by how easy it is to import data. For example, you could take a Excel file and upload it to the software, and the software will know what to do with that information and will be able to fill in the necessary fields on the tax form so that it doesn't have to be done manually, which saves a lot of time. Uh, the software constantly looks for data validation, the accuracy of the data. If fields are missing on a tax form, it'll red flag those fields. It'll alert the user before printing of missing information. So it saves a lot of time in rework. It is very efficient also to make corrections. Corrections can be made manually, and then the data will be updated in the necessary fields on the tax forms, and it can be updated to the IRS instantly with just a click of a mouse. Also, two great features, which saves a lot of time for printing and mailing, is that Sovos compliance service team will do the printing and filing with the IRS for you. So it'll print your forms that have been uploaded into the software and are on the database, which they then pull from, and then they will mail them to the IRS, and your filings will be complete. So essentially, after all the data is entered into the forms and everything checks out as being correct, that's really all you have to do.
Next, we're going to look at the environment of how Taxport ACA operates. First and foremost, Taxport ACA is a web-based application. Once the sale of services have been completed, the customer is granted near instantaneous access to Taxport ACA and are able to upload the data as necessary. This is in contrast to many competitors who use specific computer-linked software, and while there is a security feature built into Taxport ACA, this does not require hard drive space on any computer. It requires only internet access. Taxport ACA is hosted on a privately held server, and it is modeled around a SaaS-based software, or software as a service. It can be easily scalable to meet additional client need, and it can increase in the number of customers or users as the project would dictate. It can also accept changes. This is a very beneficial feature that happens almost quite regularly depending upon changes in the industry. And for operating within the tax industry, tax code changes quite a bit, so this is a very beneficial feature to have. Next, we're going to be looking at the application security and recovery features of Taxport ACA. All new employees must undergo a background check. This is a fundamental feature that Taxport wants to present to say, From the ground up, we are safe people who can hold very sensitive information. Taxport ACA also undergoes an ISO 27001 audit compliance. This is a very strong industry standard and considered one of the most stringent tests for data security around. It also helps companies anticipate risk from any unsecure access points, so it helps keep data secure from multiple perspectives. The SSL to IP address verification system that's in place is also another way that encrypts the data from going from the customer to the IRS or to Taxport or to whomever might be receiving it, so that should a hack happen, then all of the data would be encrypted and unintelligible. There's also a data recovery center put in place in the event of catastrophe. There's actually two. One is for production and the other is for disasters. Both of these help Taxport ACA continue to operate in the event of some catastrophe. It ensures online transaction processing still happens, or OLTP, and all of the data will remain safe because of these recovery centers and nothing will be lost. Looking at how the Taxport ACA platform is maintained, performance is monitored, and tracking will be the focus next. Maintenance happens via two teams, the Tech Ops team and the DevOps team. The Tech Ops team is predominantly focused on making sure all hardware is functional, whereas the DevOps team coordinates all changes with development that are happening and then relaying that information to the customer. Scheduling for these interactions can happen one of a few ways. It can be pre-planned, so there are calendar timeframes that the customer agrees to, or they can be in urgent situations where either the customer or Sovos has initiated the conversation of, we need to fix something for you. The data is monitored from a third-party vendor that relays all of the data to Sovos should any inconsistencies be recognized. Once an inconsistency is recognized, then Tech Ops and DevOps are then brought into the conversation to see what can be done. And then finally, there's a tracking process that happens with Taxport, and it centers around a very strong audit trail. So all adjustments to the functionality of Taxport have some form of blueprint as to what happened when.
So Sovos had a number of tax compliance software, products already on the market, but there was the news of a new healthcare reformation that was coming through Congress from Obama, and as soon as that started coming through, Sovos started paying a great amount of detail or attention towards that bill, knowing that if that bill is to go through, there was a lot of different new regulations and possible tax forms that were going to be coming out of it. So there was a need that they identified out of that bill. But then as soon as it kind of went through Congress, got passed, the IRS now had to be put into motion. So they had to come up with all the different regulations, regulatory deadlines, the new tax forms, and also considering that this was an entirely new tax form, they had the ability to have a entirely new way for people to transmit to them. So this way they could use this as a new way to kind of maybe make update the process of sending electronic transmittal files to them, since they started out with receiving paper copies, then down to floppy disks, then to CDs, then to electronic. Then after identifying the regulations, they had to figure out how they were going to build it. There's an enterprise level product that had been built in '96 and has just had iterations put on top of it ever since then. but they did not want to use, something that archaic. They wanted something, something fresh, something different, something new, something that's going to be easier to use than that enterprise level product. So then that also kind of tied into the strategy that they used with the product is what or who would be using it. So with some of the 1099 and 1098 forms out there, those are primarily financial forms and used by financial groups, accountants, and the finance departments at a company. This new healthcare is managed by your HR departments, and the tax forms that are associated with that are also managed by the HR representatives within the organizations. So they had a whole new market of individuals that didn't know how to transmit to the IRS or were unfamiliar with tax forms, tax statements. They knew that people got them and they know how to do their own, but we're not familiar with kind of the corporate tax. So they had to think about the functionality that it needed. It needed to be lightweight and something that would be easy for people to use, considering this is going to be a whole new department of people that are not familiar with the current kind of offerings that Sovos has. So that's kind of why they were building it as a lightweight web application. And then they also had to think about the markets that they were going to pursue. Um, Obviously, the ACA regulatory kind of guidelines is that if a company employs more than 50 people, they have to send or provide healthcare and send out these forms. So the need for this form is almost every business out there, except for the super tiny ones. But they didn't have enough sales staff to just kind of go after everyone, so they went after the largest market share first. So going after a lot of the major healthcare providers and large corporations. A lot of them already have solutions or built a solution in house, but they, as time goes on, and they understand the difficulty in the tax reporting and the changes that are going to be made, they could turn around. So they went after kind of the large fish first, and then let everyone else kind of trickle in afterwards. Then it comes to the execution. Sovos is they use agile methodology, particularly as the flavor of Scrum. So they have Scrum masters and do 2 week sprints. And so what they do is there's a 2 week sprint at the beginning of the month, and then a 2 week sprint at the end of the month, and then that code that was done that month gets released to the prior month. So there's 2 August sprints, and then that code that's developed then gets released in September. Then they also didn't have a whole lot of time for the development of this application. They started development last fall and needed to have the ability of printing forms in March, and then also doing the transmittals and corrections and whatnot by the end of June. And also clients were wanting to use the software even before those deadlines so they could prove to their organizations that they would be ready. And then there were a ton of technical challenges, considering that there's already a large, enterprise product, and then there's now global reporting, with FATCA and CDOT regulations. All the banks across the world, and or at least in 80 plus countries, are now going to a common reporting standard and are transmitting forms back and forth with each other. So there's a product that Sovos is building or has built for that. At the same time, they're building this ACA product, and then they're also kind of keeping their other product lines afloat as well. So resources was the major constraint on their end, because these other products were demanding as well. Then, being that it's the first year that this tax form is coming out, there were new kind of publications that would just get released. The IRS doesn't hold webinars, doesn't tell people when they're kind of doing these things. They just, we are who we are. You must report information to us, and so when we put out a publication, you must, obey the commands of the IRS. So basically, they just put something out there and force people to be compliant with it. So that was a technical challenge that that seemed that the scope was always kind of changing or shifting during the development.
The main need of the company in regards to Taxport ACA was to produce a product to meet the requirements of the Affordable Care Act, or ACA. Taxport ACA was successful with making the deadlines and adhering to compliance standards. In terms of costs and benefits, Taxport ACA was very successful. The first year revenues alone were 4 times greater than the cost of creating Taxport ACA, which signals an extremely profitable product. Since tax software is extremely detailed and difficult to create, companies are continually purchasing the use of Taxport ACA rather than building their own programs in-house. Timelines are another area of assessment. Keeping to a project timeline is extremely important as it directly affects costs and resources. When creating Taxport ACA, there were several late delivery times. So was the product successful overall? While Sovos may not have met all important deadlines, overall the product was successful due to its ability to meet company and client needs, as well as its ability to be highly profitable. One thing that could be done better would be adhering to timelines. Business analysts greatly underestimated the complexity of some of the requirements, which led to late delivery times. For future projects, Sovos needs to have better analysis of the requirements so they can accurately staff up the resources required to build the individual applications. One reason that this could have been an issue was due to lack of communication. Our team recommends that Sovos come up with a meeting schedule for the heads of the various departments. We suggest doing this on a weekly basis so that there is an open flow of communication, which will allow Sovos employees to better aid the staff in other departments. Due to the fact that Sovos is located in many time zones, that timing will need to be taken into consideration. Skype or a similar program is a great tool for long-distance communication. The heads of these departments then need to make sure to convey all of this information back to the rest of the department employees. This communication will let all employees and teams know what is expected of them. We also recommend that Sovos continue to make changes to the product so that it keeps up with federal and state laws that are in place. This will allow Sovos to serve its customers effectively and efficiently.
Taking a look at the PIR project from a team perspective, we felt that our strengths were revolved around the timeline that we submitted in the project proposal. We would submit our interview questions and send an email to the interviewee very early in the assignment, and this would allow us enough time to get the responses back from the interviewee and give us enough time to put some quality writing in before we went to the editing stage. And everybody participated in this process and in the process of submitting drafts and then editing the final draft with everybody's work put together. Just really made for some cohesive work that we felt was pretty good. The weakness in our team was probably the fact that we dealt with D2L as the primary form of communication. Um, looking back on the project, we feel that maybe more meetings on Skype or, face to face or just something other than D2L would have been a better option to get to know each other's schedules a little better and to just have another planning stage for how we're going to complete these tasks. So, lessons learned were that the timeline is a great thing and more communication just outside of D2L message board. Thank you for viewing our project, and we hope you enjoyed.